Thanks, Nick. I'd like to call to order the March 2nd, 2026 meeting of the Milton Budget Coordinating Committee. We've been having a lot of conversation about the FY27 budget development process, and we've been discussing that a lot in this meeting. And I'd like for us today, since we're almost there with the town budget and the school budget, I'd like for us to pivot in this conversation to really focusing back on our overall financial model, but within that, starting to unpack some of what the school department's model, how that works, and what things could look like moving forward. So I know that, and this was a follow-up from a prior meeting, that Nick and John and Katie and Jay would all have conversations. I think that Superintendent Phelan and Katie have some information on some of the drivers of the school budget to share with us today. So we'll focus the conversation there. I don't know if Nick or John, if one of you wants to kick off on that topic. But I just wanted to make clear that we're gonna start driving these conversations in this direction of modeling and forecasting.
Happy to cover town side. Sure. Briefly, I think obviously there'll be a lot of overlap between town schools and so many, our budget is largely driven by employees, so how our collective bargaining shakes out will really determine what the next couple of years looks like beyond what we can just forecast as estimated. So all of our contracts expired June 30, 2025. We're in negotiations with all of the units at various stages of doing so. And obviously trying to hold the line as much as we can on what those increases might look like, but balancing it with, understanding that employee health insurance costs have gone up, that we need to stay competitive with our peers and competitors. And then the other element that I think is important is that we do have a fairly young department, or town departments rather. There are certainly some town departments where all the employees are at the top step, but the fire department, for example, is hiring has 5 firefighters in the academy now, planning to hire 3 or 4 more over the next several months. Police department has several vacancies as well. So at the outset, those employees are certainly less expensive, but as they go through the system, they start to jump grades and steps pretty quickly, and they'll level out. But a young department is less expensive for a couple of years, and then it gets kind of to where it should be. And then the other, I think broadly, the biggest pressure, other than snow and ice, which is obviously a variable, will be our trash collection, recycling, and disposal. All of those contracts are signed through June 30th, 2027. So we've extended those to have them all come up at the same time to give us the option to figure out where do we want our recyclables to go, where do we want our trash to go, and who is going to be picking those up. Yard waste as well will be a component of that, although that's funded outside of the general fund budget and the stormwater budget. So I think in terms of non-salary expenses, the town departmental budgets are fairly static on general expenses. The biggest variable in the immediate kind of next few years will be that trash collection, disposal, recyclables collection, disposal contract that we will be working on throughout the course of fiscal 27, have lined up for fiscal 28. However, on the other hand, is we do have a trash fee, so it's an option to consider increasing that or looking at that differently. We did just raise that a couple of years ago, so I want to be cognizant of that. But there is a revenue element to that as well that would push additional costs onto the taxpayers. I think the other thing that we saw with this budget in the information technology department was just the consolidation of vendors and suppliers on IT is putting a little bit of cost on us. So Rob Mallett's budget had a jump on the town IT side, I mean, but we're talking about $500,000 budget. It's not the biggest budget in the world, but it did have it go up just in terms of regular cost of doing business. And then lastly, I'll just touch on not so much a departmental expense, but more the debt service budget, where we do expect a significant jump in debt service in fiscal '28, and then expect that to be more steady in subsequent years to where we've been historically. And the '27 and '28 debt service budget has moved up just because of a lot of projects all coming due at the same time, and a lot of capital acquisitions that may be older and not yet completed are all gonna be completed in the next little bit. So obviously still some variability related to that in terms of what our final interest costs will be, what projects do get over the finish line that we have to pay for now, what equipment does arrive, but we are expecting a decent jump in debt service again in fiscal '28, and then hopefully it'll level off a little bit there. I think those are kind of the big items, ticket items that I would be looking at and thinking about on both the town and the shared expenses side of the house. We've talked a lot about health insurance, but I'll just say I can leave that for now.
So I'll start and maybe you can finish. Our biggest driver in the schools is the salary line. It's 81% of our budget. We currently have been engaging in negotiations with our educators union just for the educators. We have not started with our custodians, food service, or the other two parts of our MTA groups, but we will do that this spring. It will be very helpful to have that locked down in order to kind of make some more thoughtful projections moving forward. That's a big variable. Katie could probably speak better to the increases that I think you've been putting forward around transportation mandates, et cetera. So if you want to just add to that.
Sure, yep. So if I can just add on the salary piece. So the majority of our employees, pretty much all of our employees, with the exception of self-contract, which is a very small percentage, are assigned to collective bargaining agreements. And the way that the wages are organized is that there are step increases as well as cost of living increases. And so when we're looking at projecting out what the increase is going to be year over year, even if we are making the assumption that we're gonna have the same staffing levels, our average step increase is about 5%, and then the cost of living increase can vary from year to year. But in some years, just speaking historically, the step increase and the cost of living increase for some employees was 7.5%. So that's just, when you consider that that's 80% of the budget, that is a huge budget driver for the school department. The other pieces that are non-salary related, we have expenses that are mandated, which include transportation. So the state says that we're mandated to provide transportation to students that may live over 2 miles from the school that they attend, and that's for our students that are in grades K through 6. So that's a cost that we have to incur. We don't have an option. And then we do provide transportation for students that are within the 2 miles, or for students in grades 7 through 12, but that's a fee-based service. So that, similar to the trash, is something where when we're looking at the increases, we also can look at the fees that we're charging our families to try to offset some of that increase year over year. We contract out for our transportation services. So we just recently went out to bid last year. Transportation, we did not get a great volume of vendors that bid on transportation, and that is not unique to Milton. That is something that is a pressure that's been kind of felt across the state. And so we are currently in a 3-year contract, and there is an option to extend for years 4 and 5. And that increase is an 8% increase year over year. We also have mandated expenses tied to tuition payments that we pay for some of our students that we can't provide service to in Milton Public Schools, so they may attend schools outside of Milton. And so we're mandated to pay for those tuition expenses as well as any transportation expense that we may incur to make sure that the student can have access to that school that is outside of Milton. The increase for those tuition expenses for the private schools is set by the state. And so we don't have the ability to negotiate. It's just a rate that's set by the Operational Services Division in October. And so we just need to make sure that we make those adjustments to the budget every year. Certain schools can also ask for a rate readjustment. And in some instances, those schools can increase, the tuition rate can increase by 20% in 1 year. And that's just set by the state. So we don't have the ability to really change or negotiate. We just have to make sure that we're building that into the budget so that our budget is reflective of what the true expense is going to be. And then we also just have inflation adjustments and increases to current annual subscriptions and services. So similar to the town side, we have a technology budget, which we have different vendors that we utilize year over year. We may have contracts that are multi-year contracts, and there's inflation adjustments for those contracts, and those range anywhere from 3 to 5% on an annual basis. So we just make sure that we build that into the budget when we're looking at projecting out year over year. Typically, another piece of what we look at would be our student population, and if there's any fluctuations in the number of students, because some of those subscriptions are based on the number of students, but our enrollment has been relatively flat year over year. So we certainly don't have declining enrollment that would cause some of those costs to decrease. So that's something that is also a budget driver when we look at projections for future years, just making sure that we're taking into account what the student enrollment is going to be.
So I would also add to that the utilities that had gone up significantly over the last few years, that the projection to the actuals were not really connecting, those dots weren't connected, those dots have been connected. So we are funding those at projected and actual levels. But that does not mean that utilities won't continue to be a strong influence on the budget as well moving forward. We also did a survey, or Katie did the work of locating every employee on the pay scale, so we can kind of get a sense of what that looks like, from who's getting to the top of the pay scale and who's in the middle and who's at the beginning. It certainly gives us a little bit of information about who might be maxing out at a certain point, being at the top of the scale. Therefore, those employees do not get the step and lane increase, they just get the COLA. So the good news is they're at the top of the scale, and they don't get steps and lanes. The hard news from a budget perspective is that they're the highest paid staff, so there's a little bit of pros and cons to that. And also for the right now, we have a considerable amount of staff who are in the growing family stage, and we have a lot of folks out on FMLA and MPLA, which requires not only to, if they have time, they can get paid to utilize their own time during that leave, but we also will be hiring folks to fill that. So that poses so depending on the age, sometimes we go in waves of our staff being of a certain age, and we're in that wave right now. Lots of good news, lots of good families growing, and but lots of corresponding coverage needed to provide the service to students. I think those are the drivers.
I should just to expand on the utilities piece a little bit, is we do have a 3-year contract that starts in December. That is a drop in the supply contract for electricity. So while our supply costs for electricity should drop a little bit, we're still seeing the demand charges that continue to rise. So it's good news that we were able to lock in a reduced electricity price for 3 years. That'll start in December of 26 and go for 3 years to December of 29. When we were going to market on heating and gas supply, the market was a little crazy, so we have held off on extending that. And obviously with this winter, that would add to additional potential costs there. So at least on the electricity side, we're locked in for another 3 years at a lower rate than we were before. On the flip side of, additional costs from Eversource and others, just for the demand side. So on the utilities front, I just wanted to add that additional context.
I see Winston has his hand up. Come on in, Winston.
Thank you. Oh, you guys can hear the illness in my voice, obviously. Sorry. A question for John and Katie on special education. A couple questions. When do you get a good sense of how much, when and how do you get a good sense of how much your cost is going to be for that year? I'm guessing that you have, your placements maybe coming into one school year, and there may be some placements that get added throughout the year. And then when do you know for 1 year what your cost is going to be? And then what would be the process as we're talking about budgeting? What would be the process for, kind of making an educated guess for the growth or fall in that cost year over year if we're going to budget ahead?
So I'll do the first part and I'll let Katie do the technical part. We meet every 2 weeks on that list of expenses, and we walk through every student's tuition, every student's transportation costs, what their program delivery service looks like. Most of it stays constant. It's a pretty steady list because we have students there from age 3 to age 22. We do look at what's happening in the district in terms of meetings that might be upcoming and that they're potentially going from a service delivery in our school district within Milton Public Schools or needing to go out. We also have folks that are meeting with families in our out-of-district schools who are starting to do well in their program and asking if they want to come back to Milton Public Schools because maybe they've had some sort of a challenge that was met with the unique service delivery outside of Milton, but now are wanting to come back and go to the neighborhood school. So there's a little bit of movement there between the ins and the outs. And then there's just the students who age out at 22 and quote, graduate from the Milton Public Schools at that age. So that's an every 2 week meeting, literally, because things change within that. Someone might need more services at a school that's outside of the Milton Public Schools, and that's added to their tuition. Transportation changes a little bit. We also have nurses that travel on vans with students, and that is a moving part. But it's a pretty solid number, Winston. I'll let Katie describe how she starts to think about it within a school year or a fiscal year and how she gets ready for the future fiscal year, which I think might be more in tune to your question.
Yeah, so when we budget for the out-of-district tuition, we do try to do it per student. So I know some of the other business directors or other districts may just set an overall budget and they don't necessarily look at it at a per student cost. But we do try to look at it at a per student cost. We also talk about if there are students that are currently in district that could potentially be going out of district because we may not currently be incurring that expense. But if they are someone that could potentially be doing a 45-day evaluation in that placement, then we know that we may potentially need to budget for it in that out-of-district line. We do also, when we're creating an upcoming budget for out-of-district tuitions, we also do try to take into account if any of the students are aging out, and if there is a corresponding adjustment to their transportation cost as well, because some of those costs can be significant. And so we do all of that, hoping that that there aren't any major changes, but in some instances, usually that budget is created in the fall or the early winter, and then of course there's still 6 months of school left, and there could be fluctuations of even just one or two students that could have a $500,000 impact to that budget. And so if that does happen, what we try to do over the summer, although the budget has already been appropriated, that's when we look at the entire school department budget and just make adjustments. If we potentially had some hiring where there was some cost savings, then we may have to reallocate budget lines from a salary budget line to another area just to make sure that the budget overall is more accurate than it was, because we're just basing it based off of the information that we may have had potentially like 6 months ago. And a piece of that, of course, is some of the grants and outside funding that we receive as well, just making adjustments to the allocation and the utilization of those areas. That's kind of a piece that we do during the summer, just to make sure that when school opens in September, that we feel comfortable that the budget is updated and accurate to what the student need is going to be.
But, and I'll add that we've talked about this a couple of times, that the revenue stream for out-of-district funding is federal funding, state funding through circuit breaker, and local funds. So all those come into one expense line where we try to use those three revenue streams as effectively as we can, knowing that we're going to get reimbursed sometime in October for circuit breaker from last year. Thinking about what our bills are for this year, use those three revenue streams in order to be as effective as possible. And keeping in mind that each one of those revenue streams ends or has to be spent at a certain time. So our local funds have to be spent by June 30th of every fiscal year. The federal funds can be spent into September of the next fiscal year. And our circuit breaker funds don't have to be expended until the following June of the next fiscal year. So when we're thinking about flexibility and trying to work those revenue streams effectively for the year that we're in, right when we get to this time of year where we're breaking into the second half of the year and certifying the budget a little bit, we're looking at how much of those funds do we want to carry into the next year, so we can be confident that we can meet any of the variable needs that Katie described that happen over the course of every school year. Remember now, we're planning usually in the fall. That's almost a year and a half in advance of something that might happen in the spring of the next school year. So there's a lot of moving parts to this kind of service delivery. So other than salaries, and to Nick's point, our non-salary items are pretty standard. You know, we don't buy that many things. We have technology things. We've got our utilities down pat. The variables are making sure that we can provide the service delivery to students and families that need it. On the Milton Public School side of that, that might mean that a child just might need a 1-to-1 aid in order to stay in the district, and would rather have them be able to go to school in the neighborhood school, so we hire that person to see if that can work. So we take a lot of steps to ensure that we can try to address as many needs as possible in district before that meeting happens, and ultimately they may need to get services elsewhere.
Yeah, so I was gonna ask about, do you encourage kids to stay within the district? So I grew up with a sister with special needs. She stayed at Milton High until 22. We graduated Milton High together. It was very nice. My father was chair of the school committee at the time and gave us both our diploma. And he worked tirelessly to keep her in the school system. Current day, I have a niece who's a freshman at Milton High. She has Down syndrome. So, my sister is a huge advocate for her to stay in the district. And so we've been, my family's been very happy with the special education that our family members have received. And I think it's hugely important. Like growing up, everybody knew my sister. Like she came to all of our games, and the same with my niece. She is on the Challenger team. She did the cheerleading. So I think it's hugely important to try and keep our kids in the district. And is that like a trend? Is that what parents are wanting when they move to town, or are they just wanting to move to town to then have their kids go elsewhere?
I think, first of all, I know those students. I interact with them quite frequently, and the the gift that we get by making our district more inclusive is a gift to the students that we serve, and also the students that benefit by having to interact with them and work with them and be part of the coaching and the integrated sports, et cetera. It's just a good thing. Our out-of-district numbers are actually on the lower side. They are right now maybe below 50. We were at maybe the high 50s when we started. So I don't know about any trends, because it's really important to these decisions are made at team meetings with families and teachers talking about what's best for that child in order for them to be successful and be in the least restrictive environment. So we would like to keep as many students as we can. But there are times where students need what they need and that the district might not be able to provide it. So we definitely, I feel that the town has done a great job of moving towards an inclusive model that benefits everybody. And so I don't know the trend, having been here very, very, like 6 or 8 months, but I can tell you that the amount of inclusive opportunities in the district is great, and which comes with expenses on the school side now, right? So there's nothing's for nothing, but I would prefer to have students go to Milton Public Schools, get their services here, and be part of the community. And I'm sure that's what the majority of the parents would want to.
Jay?
Maybe this is for later in the meeting, but I want this I want this committee to move forward, and I worry that, like, if the committee is looking at the schools and saying we can't do anything until we have a school forecast, and if the schools are saying we can't give you a school forecast until we finish negotiations, and I don't know when that could be, I don't want us to spin our wheels. If you're still in negotiations, maybe we just say assume X% pay increase each year and move along. That's more of a common sense question, but.
Yeah, no, so I appreciate that, Jay. I think the point was we can't have a good conversation about forecasts unless everyone on the team has a foundation of the drivers. So I think we've covered that today. But I think that your question is a question I have right now, which is how can we, like, understanding the very real constraint of being in collective bargaining on both sides, right? Because we are on the town side too. We have some constraints in having the most accurate forecast we can develop. But so I guess the question is, what can we do today to start moving in the direction of putting something together? So, like, no plan survives first impact, right? Like, the forecast should always be, like, being updated. And my feeling, and I think the feeling of others, and I encourage others to speak up as well, is that it will be a benefit to everybody in the town and to the decision makers in the town if we have a model to consistently refer back to year after year, understanding that there's always variability in the factors and the drivers, but that we all come from a common base of understanding how things work, where things are, to improve the quality of the conversations that we have when it comes to how we're spending town resources. That's how I feel about it. I don't know if that's how everybody else feels about it, and I just want to validate that that's everybody's understanding of the value of this, that this exercise will bring. So I have that question. I'm going to throw that question back out to everybody. And then my other question really is, what can we do today that's of value, knowing that we have the constraints that we have in putting together, like, the perfect forecast?
I didn't understand the second part.
So the second part is, to your point, right? Like, we don't have perfect inputs into the model right now because those are still being negotiated. But is there anything else we can do to get the ball rolling and, like, have a substantive conversation on models and forecasts? Can we live with an imperfect model, knowing that eventually, like, with the understanding that on X date, this CBA is likely to be done, although, you know, always knock on wood with that. And we would update the forecast or the model once that CBA is done, because that's the input.
Agreed.
Like, I'm comfortable putting placeholders like that in there and just having us develop things. Because I think the exercise of going through it and putting it together and having consensus across the boards is valuable in itself.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, one example of an assumption that we can't control is health insurance.
Right.
So if we go in front of town meeting in May and say, this is our forecast, it assumes health insurance will go up 7% per year. Here's the numbers. And then if health insurance is 10% next year, we can say, remember, here is our forecast. Health insurance went up by these many dollars. We didn't expect it. Here's the explanation as to why we didn't hit our forecast.
Yep.
Totally fine. I totally support that.
Right.
Extrapolate health insurance into salaries or whatever.
Yeah.
I think if I could just add, it would just be like, I think that comment is helpful because I think one of our goals was trying to move this along so that decisions around FY27 weren't too impacted by future assumptions and future planning. But I think that goal has kind of fallen away. And the new goal from Jay, and I don't want to speak for you, is that you would like to have something to discuss with town meeting in May. So now we need to set perhaps a goal of having something wrapped in consensus by a date in mid to late April. So maybe if in terms of the work of this committee to work towards that might be helpful so that there's clarity as to what you would like to have done and like to do at town meeting.
Yes. Sorry, that was unclear.
Yeah, so does it need to be perfect by late April?
That's a loaded question. Does it need to be perfect? Of course not.
Yeah.
It certainly doesn't need to be perfect.
Yeah.
I think it needs to be a structure that we can start to lean on and
Yeah.
populate the inputs. I agree with that. Over time, it's going to be an evolving structure that if we have a structure, the inputs will come in and out. And I also continue to say we need to learn from looking backwards because we know what we've experienced. So actuals are important in this. If we want to look at what the general landscape looks like for percentages or increases in certain areas of the town budget or the school budget, we just have to look backwards and see what they look like. Those are real expenses. So those are not projections. Those are facts, right? So we pay X amount for utilities, we pay X amount for salaries, we pay X amount for technology. And we can learn from that and decide how that influences our thinking moving forward as well.
Okay. Mark Loring has his hand up.
Yeah, thanks. I just want to echo a lot of what's been said and what John just said right there, which is, and no forecast is ever perfect because we can't see the future. So we just got to make some assumptions here. We have to be able to communicate and track clearly what our assumptions are so that we can change them in the future if we need to, or, flag for folks why things are why it's a hard budget cycle because these assumptions were a little bit wrong. And health insurance is higher or whatever it is. So I totally agree with the point that Jay made on that. And, we can't let perfect get in the way of the good. We need some type of budget forecast to guide us. And again, totally agree with John. I think utilizing past costs to me is just an easy way to make clear to folks of why are we making these assumptions around future costs. It's because this is what the town has done. And then we can, if there are particular places within that we want to kind of argue or discuss, whether or not what the town's past practice was right or not. We obviously can have that, but I think as a starting place, that's a good one.
Thanks, Mark. Brian.
Can I just roll back? I have a question on, did you say salaries you're planning them to go up 5% is average?
It's built into the steps and the lanes that are in the teacher contract.
The steps go up 5, but the total average, is it going up 5%? Is that the plan?
There are steps in lanes and then there's a COLA applied to that. And
So it's more like 7.5%.
all of those combined add
Yeah.
up to a higher percentage than just the 4.
And that's pretty standard among like other, like across districts.
Still in the
Like
top.
Methodology's the same in every school district, yeah.
Yeah,
Well, that is, but I think the state average though is like a 3% increase in salaries.
It's probably the cost of living.
Yeah,
It's not.
so not every other public employee, gets
steps.
steps. Like I don't, like in my job, like I don't get steps. I get like maybe a cost of living adjustment, maybe nothing. Yeah,
But if you looked at the
it's,
state,
I think, Brian, when you look at
Average salary.
the average salary increase,
Yeah.
you may be looking at a data point that reflects the cost of living increase, not necessarily the overall increase of the salary budget.
that's what
Right.
DESI publishes. They
for
don't do
its
the-
own,
What the average teacher salary is,
okay, interesting.
pretty sure it's like 3.
Yeah, so.
I could double check that.
Yeah, I would assume that might be a COLA-driven number, but I don't know the
Oh,
data
yeah.
point that you're looking at. If it's just a COLA-driven number, it's not taking into consideration the steps and lane movement. Those are mandated, you have to roll those over every year. That's not a negotiable choice unless you unpack the whole thing.
Brian, are you saying like DESI provides some statewide average?
They
and you
give
could look at?
Average teacher salary per district, per year.
I think it just depends on what the data source is from DESI, because DESI is getting the information from us. So
Right.
on the end of year report, we would provide what the COLA is. So if DESI is just reporting out the average on that, it's the COLA. If they're taking some other data that we're providing to them, then it could be a different calculation. So I think it just,
Maybe we'll try
it's
to-
really important
I'll try to look
figure
into
out.
that.
You might also
think it's
want to,
Nice.
I'm just putting on my hat from like, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, when I used to analyze actually the tables, like the steps and lanes and the actual increases for the Boston Public Schools, but also like all of the contracts in the greater Boston area. I think if you took a peek at like what's in Milton's collective bargaining agreement and what is in other like similar school districts, you'd find that the schedule for teacher increases based on, just the career ladder and then the level of education. So the career ladder being the steps, and which is just year over year increases, and the lanes, which reflects education level or additional certifications, whatever's built in there. I think that Milton's framework, what's in the CBA, is pretty much in alignment with what districts generally have like that salary schedule that all districts in this area generally have in place, and it's like a 5 to 7% increase. But it's also the base, right? So we're talking about percentage increases, but the base is low, right?
Mhm.
Like you start off like the Milton teachers, they're like the step one, like first year teacher salary is like so much lower compared to like City of Boston, right? So it's like you are getting like big increases, but it's not on top of like a huge salary.
So I think that's a really important point. And when we looked at the data, you have to look at where the teachers kind of sit on that scale. And we have a pretty wide range of where the teachers are on that scale. So when we talk about percentages, a 7.5% increase on someone that is potentially a bachelor's step 2 is maybe even less than what a COLA 2.5% is on someone that's a master's 30 step 25. And so it's hard to just talk about it generically as, 7.5%. 7.5% feels like a lot, but when you look at the budget, if you just had everyone that was on bachelor's 2 at 7.5%, that would be a lot less impactful on the year-to-year increase. If you have everyone that's just getting a 2.5%, but they're making master's 30 step 25, if that makes sense. I know that's kind of technical, but the way that our employees are sitting on the scale right now is just driving our salary increase to average 4.5, 5% year over year.
So two things. One is, in our presentation, we've already provided what the salary would be and the increase would be for salary if we rolled everybody over. This was our fall 5.2% budget, and it's actually 4.56%. So that would be the total increase, steps, lanes, and an estimated COLA that we're currently negotiating, so we wouldn't say that out loud. We also have where every single employee falls on that chart that Katie's talking about, how many are at each chart, what that means. So this is really important
And
for
that had
us.
been missing before, right? My understanding was a couple of years ago, this didn't necessarily exist. Or maybe I misinterpreted something I heard in a hearing, but
I'm not sure. All I can tell you is that you have the A team right
yeah,
now.
right.
and,
No,
we are
it's,
so
but
happy
this
to be
big
here.
that you guys got there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so we use this for negotiation purposes, so when we're trying to evaluate all the different financial pieces of negotiation, this helps us have a clearer
Yeah.
lens into that. Certainly, and we also contract with a vendor called ARCS, or they have a new name now, but they actually take every single contract across the entire state, and they give us summaries of every contract negotiation that's been settled over the last several years, and you really get a good sense of what the median and average of all those pieces are. So, we do have a low entry salary,
Yeah.
for sure, that we're actually talking about in our negotiations. But negotiations will be a big part of this, but it's very standard. We're not any different from anybody else from a higher percentage or a lower percentage. We're somewhere in the middle. And to answer the ultimate question, about 4.5% is where it all kind of meters out. Some steps are really big, some steps are really small, some people at the end just get 2.5, whatever the number is. It all meters itself out.
Can I address what Brian might be saying statewide? So statewide, thousands of teachers, every year, high-paid older teachers retire. I don't know anything about education, but I used to be a benefits actuary. Every year, high-paid teachers retire. Every year, young, low-paid teachers come into the system. So if you're looking at statewide, thousands of people, to me, that might explain why the actual amount paid only goes up by COLA, even though individual people go up by more. And I've asked that about the Milton. I was like, why wouldn't this happen? And the answer I get is, we've got a lot of mid-career people. Answer I get is, we hire a lot of new hires who have experience instead of new hires right out of school. So that may be a reason why Milton looks a little different. And just, it's lumpy, you're gonna get a smoothed over the statewide, but you're gonna get a lumpier town by town. So it might be that what you're seeing is in reality, the state is going up by the cost of living, but each individual is going up by more, except the ones who retire and the ones who are hired.
But I have to say that I don't think Milton starting salary is especially low. I've lived that. I feel like having a 22-year-old, 23-year-old with a bachelor's coming out of college, making $60,000 a year with zero experience is actually pretty good. And maybe I just have my private sector hat on. And they get a couple months off, I don't think it's especially low. And I know when you're looking at hiring teachers and young teachers are looking at Boston versus Milton, going to Boston, maybe you get a little bit more, but it's actually not that much more for a harder, more complicated job sometimes. So I think that's why suburban towns are actually attractive to younger teachers. So I wouldn't throw Milton under the bus saying we pay too low. I think we pay adequate or even more than adequate.
I think that's subjective. We just look at the data and,
Yeah.
what the different scales look like across the communities around us. Boston happens to be a neighbor of ours, which really kind of pushes the boundary out a little bit because they are a little bit higher and they have less steps than we have. So we are aware of where our hiring numbers are, what could be appropriate. And we do hire, to Jay's point, the best candidate. So if that candidate is someone with 7 years' experience or 12 years' experience, we hire that person, because that's who we want in front of our children, so. But the scale is pretty uniform across most cities and towns. We're in good shape. And when we talk about the 7%, some of those are just unique to how the scale works. But I think the overall 4.56, that's the salary increase for the year if we rolled everybody over. That's a large number, though, in and of itself. That number is $3.8 million. Do you know what I mean? Like that's a big number, so.
Mark's got his hand raised.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I just mostly was wondering, some of this feels like it's pushing honestly into almost like negotiations territory, right? There's two parts of this. It's not just what the district wants, it's what the unions also want and will accept. And, kind of that negotiation is a piece that's managed by the school department and school committee. To me, I think for the purposes of this committee, and as we're talking about long-term projections, it's a matter of, again, what are reasonable assumptions we can make around what staff salaries within schools will be in the next 3, 5, 10 years, whatever is the time horizon that this group is building towards. And I think that's again where it gets back to a point John made, which is, let's look at past practice. We could also look at, again, what is the percent increase we're seeing in kind of that other towns have seen, other kind of comparable towns within the kind of metro area over the last 5 years, like whatever that kind of metric is. But I think that's really what we need to be looking at here, rather than having kind of a more detailed conversation about Milton Public Schools specific teacher salary scale or competitiveness. Like those are all things that the school committee and the school department look at as it relates to negotiations and as it relates to hiring and increasing kind of diversity of staff and things like that. So I think that's somewhat out of the helpfulness of this conversation, is my opinion.
You know what, sorry, that was a long segue, but that's a question. But I did want to make a different point to what you said, is I thought that one thing that would be helpful with budgets is, it seems like from your spreadsheet, we do a lot of budgeting based on prior year appropriations. I know we talked once about trying to do projections, to either actuals and projections. And my 2 cents would be, that would be a big help and improvement for everybody.
Well, I think to your point, to Mark's point, I think doing the projections to actual is key. And I think we need, so what I want to do is, or what I will propose is that maybe we get like a couple of workshops going, like one team help with the forecast model and the other team help with, it sounds like also we've had a lot of discussion around budget calendars and synchronization. And I know in the beginning we had a lot of discussion around that, but I think it would help if we put some more direction and maybe had some of us sort of do some work in the intervening time between between this meeting and the next meeting to put something together along those lines based on what we've been unpacking. Because I agree too. I mean, as much as diving into the intricacies of the teacher steps and lanes can be fascinating, it's not going to get us where we need to be for the product that we're trying to produce.
I'll jump on the forecast workshop.
Okay.
So can I
think-
just,
Yeah.
just to say it out loud the way I
Yeah.
understand it, and Katie, let me know how you see this as well. For example, Katie and I will just sit down and make a list of assumptions.
Mhm.
We're assuming X amount of increases for these big lines that we organize our budget by, and we extrapolate that over 3 years.
Yeah.
And we just say, here's what the schools would look like under the following assumptions. This is the growth of
Yeah,
the.
if you did a 3%, a 5%, or whatever, you
Just-
pick the percentages, the
Well,
run
we-
rate.
So, but we have staffing level, we have percent, salary increase level that we can make an
Yeah.
assumption on, and then we have the drivers that Katie just talked about that were
Yeah.
not in salary based, transportation, et cetera. And that's the big piece of clay that we're about to put into the,
Sure.
that's gonna have to be shaped over time, to your point. It's
Mm-hmm.
not perfect, but it's a blunt instrument to start. We
Yeah.
can put that on the table relatively soon in order to make that happen while we're, finishing up and organizing ourselves for FY '27. Would that be fair? Is that a fair task?
Winston has his hand raised.
I think John just started answering my question. Sort of what are we generating or leaving with here? So if John and Katie in the schools are going to put together 2 or 3 year with their assumptions, what's the other side of that? Are we making that at the town level as well and then coming back to combine the two in our next meeting?
So, yeah, I think the question is, so we do have something at the town level, right? I think the question is, does the town level, so the school model is an input into the town model. I guess my question for Nick and Amy is, do we have everything we need in the town model? Or do we need to make adjustments to that?
As a tool, it is set up in terms of what the inputs are. We would need to spend, just like John and Katie, would need to just kind of dive to get a little bit deeper because we've kept it very high level. It's just like a calculation of salaries and a calculation of expenses.
Yeah.
So we can revisit it in a little bit more kind of a deeper detail to talk about what I've talked about in terms of increase on the DPW, our forecast for trash and recycling because of the uncertainty that we're gonna face in '28.
Yep.
And then fine tune on the salary side a little bit better in terms of where we expect higher or lower increases. So it needs a little bit more detail, but the framework of the tool itself is fine. It's not as defined as it could be. So we can take some time to do that.
And I actually have a conflict for next Monday's meeting.
Okay.
I have a meeting with a group that I want to make sure I can hold. So I don't know if this is like a 1 week thing or is this a 2 week thing? Because it might be helpful for Katie and I to just
Are we
work.
on for next week too?
I think we
Did we
are.
get bumped out because of the snow?
Yeah.
Because of the snow, we bumped this one in and we're scheduled right now for the 9th and the 23rd.
Okay.
So if the 23rd seems like 100 years away, but if we could do the 23rd, that might give us time to get our projections together. And to your point, Megan, we want to make sure that they're actually working in harmony with Nick's
Yeah.
projections so they can actually fit and be plugged in a little bit. So
Yeah.
should we say on the 23rd that we'll work on our side stuff and then we'll meet with Amy and Nick a little bit to make sure that they understand how we flow into your big picture and then we can kind of give that projection on the 23rd. Does that make sense?
I think it makes sense.
I'm on vacation next week, so that makes a lot of sense to me.
Nice.
Should
Okay.
we then meet 2 weeks from now instead? So what are we gonna do next week?
I think, yeah, it sounds like we're meeting in 2 weeks.
Well, the 23rd is 3 weeks,
Or three,
so
yeah,
should we meet on the 16th?
or the 17th, or, yeah, what is today, the 2nd?
Today, so yeah, just getting
Yeah,
the schedule.
the 16th. I'm okay with meeting on the 16th, I mean,
I don't know.
I'm not
If-
here,
if-
that's
Amy's
okay.
not here.
Amy's not here, and we're trying
I'm not
to
here
fold
next
it in.
week or the
I just wanna make
16th.
sure from a, right now where we are, I know we're not talking about 27, but we're
Yeah.
actively involved in 27 and trying to get projections together, and if Amy's not gonna be available, do we go with the 23rd? I'm not sure, and again,
Yeah.
to Nick's point, high level, a little bit lower than high level, right? We're trying to come up with a little bit more of a firmer number with firmer assumptions. So, what is what's the reasonable time to get that work done, I guess? And I don't do that work specifically. I know Katie does that work specifically, so I don't want to make
Right,
assumptions for
right.
folks. I am available on the 9th and the 23rd. Actually, we already have a meeting for the 23rd, so it's already on there. So Nick and Amy and Katie, I don't know how you want to.
That works, that would work for us, and I think if we're targeting
23rd.
late April, mid to late April, I
Yeah,
think we should be in okay shape if everybody's okay with that.
Okay.
yeah,
So the 23rd, that's our work to take away.
What do we do if this realistic forecast doesn't match the realistic revenue side?
It will not, and that's where the beginning of the conversation starts. Like that's absolutely why we need to do it.
Yeah.
To Megan's point, right, we really have to have a really hard conversation about the big blocks of this and as early as possible, understand where the gaps are in these big picture projections around revenue and expenses. So when we have to begin to have these conversations, what I would consider to be in August of next year for FY '28, we already know what the big gaps are. And we can already start to talk about what's driving those gaps and what needs to be done to mitigate those gaps.
Right.
I mean, like I think that's if we can get the big blocks done between now and June, kind of explain to town meeting what we're thinking, and then be really upfront when we meet in August and when we get to when everybody starts to pay attention again in September. Here are the big blocks of here's our estimated revenue. This might change by 300,000 here or 500,000 there, but it's not changing by 5 million.
Right.
Here's our projected costs, given what has happened in the past and what we are projecting for the near future. And here's the deficit, or here's where we're almost in line and this is working. And that, to me, it would be great if we could settle on the big blocks and then breathe a little bit in June and July and then sit down in August and start to really have the conversations in August and September in front of the public early. So this budget, the making of the budget isn't squeezing us in our work, that we're actually doing it as proactively as possible.
And that's my question on like the calendar part too, is if like we had like sort of a corollary of like, all right, so like what's the timeline for implementing the tool, so to speak?
And I think starting with revenue is a really big and good idea to do, and I know that we did that, and I think it's because you can only spend what you have.
Right, yeah.
But I think that having the conversation about projecting the revenue along with a very soon after, okay, now that we have revenue projected, that's where we're gonna start. You have to have the expense thing right behind it. And if we can have that in the early fall, I think that we can have better discussions without the pressure of having to finish the budget so quickly, right? What gives us the whole fall to work out the ins and outs and the impacts that we're all concerned about now. We can have those early without the pressure of the timeline of having to get the budget done that we have right now.
So on the 23rd, we'll expect to see the first kind of whole town of Milton projection for the next 3 years, revenue and expenses altogether. Three,
yeah. I think 3 years is a model that would make sense.
Yeah.
Anything beyond 3, it goes to guesses.
Who knows?
You get less
Yeah.
meat in the bone.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to go past 3. I just wanted to say clearly what we're going to see on the 23rd.
Sometimes I'm like, can we go past 1 even now?
Yeah.
Just kidding.
Where are you in contract negotiations? It won't be done in a month, right?
It will not be done. It will be hopefully done by the time the school year ends. That would be ideal, but and it's been very productive the MEA has been great, so we're really looking forward to tying it up. It's been a good experience.
And on the town side, in your negotiations, are the town employees, do they ever look to see what the teachers are doing and then they're expecting the same?
Units will throw all sorts of information out there that is beneficial to their argument. We push back typically and say, what are the comps for people in your position and communities that are similar to ours? So we won't necessarily say, what does a teacher make or what is the teacher's COLA? We try to say, well, if you're a heavy equipment operator in Milton, what is a heavy equipment operator in our peers doing? So that's how we try to push back on it.
And then also on the policy from DOR, I went on their website and, there are so many different policies for so many towns. I printed off Southborough and Winthrop. Is there one town that you're actually modeling after? It seemed like it could have been a combination.
So the benefit is they're all very similar. So I think
Yes,
Southborough
yes.
is fairly recent, right?
Yeah,
What's the
so
date on
that's
that?
why I printed that off, because that was 2024.
Southborough and
that's-
Rentham, I think, were the two I was looking at because they were the most recent policy packets that DOR put out
Okay.
there.
Okay, so that's, I should
Yep,
focus
that's a
on
good
that.
place to look.
Okay.
Well done.
Sorry, policy of what?
It was just the financial policy packet that covers all the financial policies of those towns.
Okay.
With the DOR models and DOR's assistance in drafting them. They're all on the DOR website.
Okay, we're about 5 minutes past time. So I think we have some clear direction for our next meeting, which will be on March 23rd. We have a little bit of time. Folks are gonna break out and come up with some models. And so given that, I will take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
He's not a member, so he can't leave.
I'm just, actually, I'll say it differently, let's move this along.
I'm like, I'll take
Officially, let's just
it.
get
I'm
this
like, I'll
going.
take it. Do I have a second? Do I have a motion and a second? Okay. All right. All in favor? Aye. Okay. Thank you.
Try, John.